Hey folks, happy Wednesday to you. Wednesday, February 3rd, and we continue our Pastor's Devotional series using our February prayer calendar. And today we're in the Gospel of Luke, so I invite you to turn over into the Gospel of Luke. And as you do so, I remind you that the encouragement from our prayer ministry is that we are writing these scriptures down. So my practice is each time after I record one of these videos that I sit down with my journal and write these scriptures out, and it's just another way of sort of committing them to our body, and so invite you to do that. Wonderful scripture today. You probably have heard it before, maybe not. This is one that's often taken verse by verse out and used in different ways, even in popular culture. We see this. So Luke chapter 5, verse 36 is where we are today. Luke 5, 36. All right, so I'm going to start. He also told them a parable, he being Jesus. No one tears a piece from a new garment and sews it on an old garment. Otherwise, the new will be torn, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins and will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. All right, so this idea of new into old, I'll tell you what verse 36 always reminds me of is my great grandmother on my maternal side. She was a wonderful quilt sewer. And she would take, and so we, in our family, we have these quilts that are sort of spread about. I'm still waiting for one to be passed on to me at some point. And she would take pieces of clothing or my great-grandfather's shirts, or from her apron. She always was in the kitchen wearing an apron, and these old pieces, and she would make these quilts. And so even though they've been washed many times, it's almost like you can the smell of their home is there, and the warmth of their embrace. And so in that way, I completely reject this passage, but understand exactly what it means, right? That as we are moving through life, to just take the old and place it onto the new will not work. And whether that's old models or old relationships or old leadership, whatever it is, that as the new is emerging, that it has a life of its own, and somehow there's a mixture there between the two. But to have the new and just to place the old on top of it, that Jesus is saying that won't work. And what he's referring to is this movement from Judaism into Christianity. And there was debate in those days from Jewish Christians that Christianity was just a continuation of Judaism, sort of the next revelation of Judaism. And so you had to follow all of the Jewish laws, and you just sort of put those Jewish laws on top of this new relationship with Christ. And Jesus it would argue, and first and second generation Christians, many of them would argue that there's something new in this relationship with Christ, and you can't simply just consume it into the old Judaism, that there's new ways, and that some of those old ways might provide great value. And we're not saying that the old ways don't provide any value, but some of the new has to stand on its own. And so we might think about that in our own life. There's certain struggles that we go through in life. There's growth that we have in life. And so how does the new stand apart from what was? So as we grow spiritually, or we grow emotionally, or we grow relationally, how do we create new patterns and not just put the old patterns on top of them? Now, of course, some of the old patterns are good. We want to utilize them, but not all of the old patterns are good. And so some of them need to melt away so that the new can stand forth. And that's a helpful devotional thought of the day, I think. As a pastor, personally, this passage brings a lot to mind in terms of what's going to happen to the church post-COVID. We've developed a lot of new patterns in this time. Almost a year now of not being able to meet together physically in worship, and so when the church is able to open again, do we just say, okay, everything that we've learned, we're going to put that aside and we're just going to bring all of the old patterns back to bear? Would that be the healthiest thing? Let me give you two examples. So now that we've been doing all of our administrative meetings by Zoom, we've had almost 100% participation. People can get there. I mean, we've had people from different parts of the country, even when they're traveling, still able to be at those meetings, when otherwise, if they were just in person, they wouldn't be able to be there. And so we've had much more participation. So do we keep some of that, or do we just throw it out? More importantly, what I would say is that we all know that Sunday is an important day in the life of the church. It's the day in which we gather to worship, but we argue, not argue with one another, but we make the argument that really our faith is what happens in between Sundays, right? Our Sunday morning is a time for us to come and to celebrate what God has done in us and through us, and to gain some wisdom and courage from God for what is ahead. And in between Sundays is where our faith is lived. And I've just got to say, since we haven't been able to gather on Sunday morning in person, the amount of prayer meetings has increased in the church. The amount of small group meetings has increased in the church. The amount of mission work that we've been doing has increased in the church. The amount of outreach from individual members to one another has increased in the church. All of that is more than pre-COVID. So all of that is the new wineskin. So how are we able, when we come back together, and when we can do that safely, how are we able to keep some of that spirit in which people really lived prominently, that their faith is what they do every single day, not just on Sunday morning? And how do we meld those two things together? The old ritual, wonderful ritual of gathering together on Sunday morning, but this new way of life in which we are just living out our faith in so many different ways. More prayer, more study, more opportunities to serve one another. And I really hope that that new garment, that those new wineskins really exist beyond this COVID time. And so many ways to think about this passage. I encourage you on this day to think about what is new in your life that can stay, should stay, that you learned during COVID, or that you were forced to do during COVID, that you don't want to go back on. One example that I've heard many families share is the number of families that are doing sort of weekly Zoom calls. So rather than just one sibling calling mom and dad over the weekend, that you have the whole family is together. And they're all on the same screen, and they're all talking to one another. And many families that didn't do that often between COVID, they just waited for those times in which they might be able to gather together. But now, because they can't gather physically, they're gathering more often together and connecting. And that would be a wonderful tradition for many of these families to continue if they are able to do that. So lots of ways in which we can apply this, lots of thoughtfulness that this passage can bear in our lives. I invite you to consider today, what is it that you are learning new that needs to stay? And what is it from the past that might need to melt away so that the new can take hold? God bless. I hope you have a great day.